This call was made by Annette Presti, mother of Joanne Presti, right after she found her daughter lying dead in her living room. The absolute shock and disbelief in her voice provide a window into just how grotesque the scene was in that home. But in order to fully understand just how tragic this story is, there's some essential context that must first be established. Joanne Presti was killed on January 5, 2004. Murdered alongside her was her daughter, Alyssa Presti, who was just 12 years old at the time. The discovery of their bodies prompted a massive investigation that hit dead end after dead end, with police struggling to connect even a single suspect to the horrific crime. Today, we're going to unpack the heartbreaking case of Joanne and Alyssa Presti, who were murdered in their own home by the last person anyone expected. The story begins, like so many do, with a warm, close-knit, and utterly normal family. Joanne was born on the 7th of March, 1969, to Peter and Annette Presti. Growing up in Stoneham, Massachusetts, Joanne was known to be fiercely independent and unafraid to speak her mind. The fact that she was Italian provides us a bit of a hint about how her childhood was. She was the only daughter of the family, which meant that her three brothers were likely extremely protective of her, and she probably felt the same way about them. Much like most Italian families, the Prestis hosted frequent gatherings where everyone ate meals together and maintained their familial bonds. Not much has been made public about her early life. By all accounts, Joanne had a normal childhood, one that shaped her into a generous and highly empathetic woman. However, just like so many other women, Joanne had to deal with men that only wanted to take advantage of that empathy. We can see as much in her romantic history, which shows her trusting and ultimately being betrayed by man after man until she finally decided she didn't need anyone at all. The first major relationship she had was with John Carter, a relatively successful hockey player signed to the Boston Bruins. In around 1990, Joanne was studying to become an eye doctor when she met the handsome athlete, and it's safe to say that he swept her off her feet. It seems like they had a brief but intense relationship, one that led to Joanne getting pregnant. Alyssa was born on February 20th, 1991, which happened to be around the time her mother and father's relationship ended as well. John was at the height of his career, and it's possible that he didn't see Joanne as more than a fling. When he found out she was pregnant, he made it quite clear that he didn't plan on being involved with the child. Undaunted by John's selfish mentality, Joanne knew she could raise her daughter on her own, and she did. She was driven, committed, and hardworking. And though he refused to be involved in Alyssa's life, John at least had the decency to pay child support. A few months after she broke up with John, Joanne was ready to move on. She met a man named Frank Martineau, and they immediately hit it off. Unlike John, Frank seemed like he wanted to settle down. Based on what I've read, he was a sweet and caring man, and he did what he could to be a good boyfriend to Joanne. In fact, their relationship was so copacetic that they decided to get married and had a son named Justin in 1993. Frank was a loving father, which meant that Alyssa finally had a positive paternal figure in her life. Together, Joanne, Frank, Alyssa, and Justin seemed to form the perfect family, but sadly, it wasn't meant to last. While Joanne and Frank initially had a great relationship, they eventually started experiencing friction. They started arguing and just didn't seem to see eye to eye anymore. Stuff like this happens. People grow apart. And Joanne and Frank did what any two adults would do if their relationship wasn't working out anymore. They got divorced. Their marriage had lasted 5 or 6 years, and it may have been the best relationship of Joanne's life. Hearing that might sound odd, because it was a marriage that ended in divorce after all, but the person Joanne got involved with after Frank was far worse on so many levels. Around the turn of the millennium, Joanne started seeing a man named Thomas Polak. There's a good chance that he was extremely charming at first. Men like him tend to be, until they show their true colors. You see, Thomas was not a gentleman. He was not a kind man. In fact, it didn't take much to make him fly into a violent rage, and that's exactly what he subjected Joanne to time and time again. Thomas had a history of abusing women. His ex-wife, Cassandra, reported experiencing brutal abuse at his hands, including an incident where he slammed her head into a bathroom sink. It bears mentioning that Cassandra was pregnant at the time, which shows just how much of a sociopath Thomas could be. Cassandra was left with 2 black eyes after that incident, and it's possible that this is when she left him. Not long after, Thomas met Joanne. who he charmed with the mask that so many abusers put on to lure their victims into a sense of security. But pretty soon, that mask began to slip. Thomas violently beat Joanne every chance he got, even going so far as to choke her with a phone cord at one point. In another incident, Thomas threatened to blow up her car. And if his violent past is anything to go by, this isn't something Joanne would put past him. All of this abuse happened right in front of Alyssa, who hadn't seen anything like it up until this point. Frank had been a caring father figure, but Thomas, he was someone to be feared, and fear him she did, just like her mother. But getting away from Thomas wasn't as easy as it could have been, because shortly after the relationship began, Joanne became pregnant with his child. Sean Polak was born in 2001, and his mother filed a restraining order against his father at around the same time. Joanne knew that she had to protect her children, and she did just that. In 2002, her divorce with Thomas was finalized, and she made sure he never got anywhere near her again. At this stage in her life, Joanne was in her early 30s, with 3 kids to take care of. Her relationships had been disappointing at best and disastrous at worst. She needed to get away, to get a fresh start somewhere new, somewhere her kids could play safely in the streets and she could sleep soundly at night without having to worry about Thomas bursting through the door. That's when she found out about the town of Woburn, Massachusetts. Woburn is the kind of town that has a timeless feel to it. Indeed, having been settled in 1640, it was one of the oldest towns in America. More importantly, it was a place where people could go to feel safe, where a tightly knit community of blue-collar families always looked out for each other. In other words, it was without a doubt the perfect place for Joanne to start fresh. She moved to Woburn in 2003, and it really seemed like a new chapter in her life had begun. She became heavily involved in the community, winning the affection of her neighbors with her energy, charisma, and boundless generosity. Despite all the suffering, despite having every reason not to trust people, Joanne refused to let her beautiful true self be tainted by the past. And so, she became a pillar of the town, with residents often calling her the Pied Piper of Woburn for her generous ways. Joanne had a particular love for children, often hosting events for kids in the neighborhood, many of whom felt like she was the only person they could talk to, or rather, that she was the only adult who would listen. Alyssa always seemed to settle in quite well. Having seen the frightening reality of how some people could be with Thomas, she'd grown wise beyond her years. She was her grandparents' favorite, but despite all the coddling, she was a responsible young girl who was more than capable of taking care of her younger brothers. It was like she'd inherited all of her mom's traits in that regard. She was protective, warm, kind, the perfect little girl in every single way. When she started attending Daniel L. Joyce Middle School, her academic prowess started to show as well. She was a straight-A student who dreamed of becoming a pediatrician someday, and also found time for extracurricular activities like cheerleading. Slowly but surely, Joanne and Alyssa started to feel safe once again, not knowing that there was a wolf in sheep's clothing in their midst. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. When Joanne moved to Woburn, she immediately felt a bond with one of her neighbors, a woman by the name of Bobby Jo Miller. She had problems of her own, including an ex-husband named Michael Bazanowicz, who gave her plenty of grief. Joanne often acted as the mediator between them, never taking sides in their arguments and maintaining a cordial relationship with Michael. Apart from that, there was Harinder Singh, Joanne's landlord, who lived with his wife nearby. Harinder was a kindly man that seemed to really like Joanne. You could say that everyone liked Joanne. But in Harinder's case, some might say that there was a bit more there. He'd always find an excuse to come around to fix her sink or do some other home repairs. Joanne gave him unusually free access to her house, seeming to trust him around her kids. As it turns out, she wasn't afraid to be vulnerable around him either. She'd often go to his basement to have a few drinks and chat, an activity in which Mrs. Singh was curiously not involved. Was there something romantic going on between Joanne and Harinder, or were they just friends with a perfectly innocent relationship? Either way, Harinder was an important person in Joanne's life. So was Bobby, and both of them became concerned one day when Joanne seemed to have vanished into thin air. After spending New Year's with her family, Joanne hung out with Bobby Joe's sister at a bar in town while Bobby babysat the kids on January 3rd. She picked up her kids the next morning and visited Bobby later that evening. Bobby has said that Joanne looked tired, but apart from that, nothing seemed to be wrong. This turned out to be the last time she ever saw her. On January 5th, Bobby called Joanne at around 8 a.m. to confirm their shopping plans for the day. None of her calls were answered. She also noticed that Joanne's blinds, which were usually open, had been shut for hours. Joanne often cracked a window open when she smoked a cigarette, and even outside of that, she usually liked to let some natural light in. Bobby also noticed an icicle forming beneath Joanne's car, indicating that it hadn't been driven in quite some time. Worried that something might be wrong, she knocked on Joanne's door, but received no response. There wasn't a sound coming from that home. Bobby's concern was growing, so she decided to call Joanne's mother, Annette, to ask if she could check on her. What happened next would leave both Bobby and Annette with deep emotional scars for the rest of their lives. At 4 p.m. on January 7th, Annette and Peter Presti arrived at Joanne's home and found the side entrance unlocked. When they entered, they found Joanne lying on the couch, facing the backrest. It was dark in the room, and Annette's eyesight wasn't what it used to be. She approached, possibly calling out Joanne's name. That's when she saw the pool of blood beneath her daughter's head. Realizing her daughter was dead, Annette started hyperventilating. She had no idea what was going on. Frantic and desperate, she called 911.
Her children, I don't know where her children are. We have them left there. We have 2 cars and an ambulance on the way.
While police and paramedics headed their way, Joanne's parents got a closer look at her. What they saw must have been pure torture to look at. Joanne had been bound by rope and duct tape. The lower half of her clothing was missing, with her underwear found nearby, having been rolled up as if removed quickly. A towel had been stuffed in her face as if to gag her, and on her throat there were deep gashes that were undoubtedly the cause of her death. Annette and Peter had to find the children now. If Joanne was dead, did that mean the kids were gone too? Luckily, Justin had been staying over at his father's. They soon found Sean in his crib. He was alive, though severely dehydrated with a diaper that hadn't been changed for days. Then, Peter headed up to Alyssa's room and screamed. He saw his granddaughter lying face down on the floor, blood smeared across the mattress and walls. Her throat had been slashed, unleashing a pool of blood that she now lay in. It also seemed like she'd been punched in the face multiple times, and the perpetrator likely chased her around the room before killing her. When paramedics arrived, one of them asked Annette if they could do anything for her. All Annette could do was ask them to hold her hand. Michael Bazanowicz ended 2 bright lives that day and traumatized 2 other children. Joanne's brother has said that Sean's drawings show how disturbed his state of mind was after the incident. The entire Woburn community couldn't seem to fathom what had happened. Joanne and Alyssa were fighters from the start. They had the kind of mother-daughter bond that few people ever managed to achieve, and they deserved to live the full, joyous life they fought so hard for. The fact that Bazanowicz is still alive and they're not may be an injustice in and of itself. But it's perhaps fitting that Bazanowicz spends his days rotting in a cell, with no freedom and no escape. Just a constant reminder of why he's there playing over and over again in his head. So what do you think about this case? Did Michael Bazanowicz get the sentence he deserved? Or should prosecutors have pushed for the death penalty? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.